A spectral howl was carried by the arid wind, where corrosion was seen across the barren hills equipment that resembled the skeletons of a forgotten empire. For many years, this mine was a cemetery, poisonous, abandoned shafts pools, and a deep quiet that suffocated out of the recollection of wealth once snatched from the planet, Earth. Investors ran away. Familiarly were the ones who had staked everything. Fractured. It ended in 2019, or so Juan pondered. Two men then started to stroll into the wreckage with only uncooked dimples and an impossibility. An experienced prospector named Freddy with decades of wounds and Victor Sengrave on his body, and Juan Ibarra, all mechanic with the ability to revive machines that are believed to be irreparable. To the residents, their arrival appeared lunacy. Not only was the mine dead, but it was cursed. However, Juan and Freddy didn't visit to salvage scraps. They arrived to try to write the narrative. Additionally, prior to our discovery how they transform poverty into wealth. Make sure to subscribe and like this video. You won't want to overlook what occurs next. The first indications of life appear at the pit's darkest corner, and after a collapse, the neglected shaft was capped. During the 1980s, it produced nothing, according to the records. However, others had a vein pattern that Freddy noticed. Rejected as useless. He identified a geological fissure, the type that might trap millions of dollars in gold if pursued closely. Sufficient. It wasn't debris to him. It was an enigma awaiting resolution. However, riddles are not self-solving. The mine drowning in poisoned water that has been contaminated bearing off of arsenic. That had prompted technicians to work on engineering a scavenged Frankenstein pump system from the state's scrapyards. There the engines coughed, the pipes moaned, and following weeks of experimentation, there the water level fell. What had been a suffocating tomb was now exposed, prepared for testing. At that point, the first anomaly was discovered. In samples of dirt, Freddy sent samples to a laboratory. Often the gold particles came to the surface. Particles that are not visible to the human eye, yet indisputable evidence of something greater buried beneath. There was a hint of a gleam of prosperity that turned the sorrow into a state of preoccupation. Word quickly got out. The historic mining households, the ones that had deserted this location generations ago, started to reappear, seeking clarification. There are rumors that lawsuits were filed. According to some, Freddy Juan was trespassing on land at all times, intended to be touched once again. The strain thickened, but the men persisted, believed that there was a secret hidden in the mine. When the initial examination's ground gave up, when the drill penetrated greater than ore, it made pockets ofkas that hadn't been exposed to light in 6th century. The rig was shaken by the explosions, putting the crew's lives in danger. The air that smelled strongly of sulfur and deterioration. A reminder that the planet doesn't give up its riches without spilling blood. Freddy's estimations, however, were correct. What originated from that broken core sample astonished everyone. Veins throbbed with quartz, with flawless gold flecks that matched the grades that were previously taken from most renowned fields in Nevada. It wasn't merely a finding. It was the verification of the stretching of a gold system richer, deeper, and riskier than nobody had guessed. However, striking gold is not equivalent to holding it. The more profound, more violent the mine, the more they dug. Became. Under stress, equipment broke. Juan, armed only with his torch and an endless will, reconstructed machines in the field that ought to have required several months to fix. They gained additional time with each patch. Greater depth, additional ounces of potential, and potential quickly became evidence. The initial cleanup turn discovered gold worthings of thousands. Still modest, but sufficient evidence that the fading mine wasn't teachist. Sufficient to attract speculators and unscrupulous purchasers who emerged from nowhere, providing money, tools, event-covered alliances. Freddy declined. He had witnessed what greed looked like, how quickly fortunes might change the lives of miners to sapphire. When commitments are surpassed by patience, then the most startling twist yet. Below one of the ancient sensors detected a tunnel empty space. Initially, it appeared to a gap caused by blasting. However, when they broke through, they discovered something unfamiliar. Rusty helmets, tools, and initials etched by miners who had vanished many years ago. It wasn't only a room. It was a lost crypt, time-stamped history. However, that crypt's walls revealed a different tale. With their lights shining on them. Veins like stars set in stone. They glistened. Freddy rubbed the top of it with his pick, and the particle that landed in his palm shone with a brightness that no say might say no. However, this wasn't only regarding gold. It has to do with scale. These samples revealed grades so high that seemed quite impossible, as though Themion had been restraining its genuine wealth until the appropriate people compelled its awake. However, each hammer blow carried a risk. More in-depth sections disclosed fractures that resemble scars, unsteady and poised to topple at the smallest vibration. There was old dynamite left. Long-dead miners' remains were buried in debris, perspiration, unsteadiness, and fatal. A single misstep could have blown the entire process to dust. Juan moving through the tunnels at a crawl with just a headlamp, and the nerves of steel meticulously marked each charge, distributing them using instruments that appeared as though they were in a combat zone. Each and every to succeed was to survive. Every error would have put a stop to everything. Above ground, unusual guests started to show up. Dark parking SUVs atop ridges. Men using clipboards to view the website without speaking. Some asserted that environmental examiners, but not credentials, were never displayed. Unmanned aerial vehicles shivered at night, their crimson lights circling and flickering like predator spree. Freddy saw the trend companies, rivals, and possibly even ancient assertions circling like vultures. Once more, the mine wasn't just breathing. It was bringing in a storm. However, that was impossible to conceal evidence. As soon as Juan the smelter was initially completely cleaned, the bars that appeared were sufficiently pure to evoke rumors of an old deposit, something that hasn't changed since the early empires were built during the 1900s surges. Every one bar not only supported weight, but the story, as though the specters of the original outlast. Prospectors were getting paid their obligations. However, wealth has a method of fostering anarchy. The greater the production, the more pressure. Freddy was aware of it. They had gone too far. Next, the maps changed. While examining the location, Juan found a deviation considerably below the deepest shafts, a distortion caused by magnetic fields, implying a huge or confined body beneath a thick rock dome. Nobody had never made it there. Nobody had ventured. Tuduk, drilling through would be necessary historic flaws, putting floods at risk, collapses, including seismic activity. However, if it was the instrument's recommendation, it was merely a vein, a mother lode, that is. The pursuit of depth turned into a conflict against time. Water rushed through crevices and returned more quickly than the pumps could resist. Overheating. The machinery shouted in the unrelenting dust. Juan's evenings faded into dawn while he was rebel engineers made from scrap no forging supplier might offer. In the dark of the procedure, men murmured that he was more than a mechanic. He was a surgeon, maintaining the mine's core full with spontaneous wonders. However, miracles were unable to conceal the rising animosity. Local officials showed up requesting examinations, asserting water tables in the area were jeopardized by blasting. There were demonstrators at the gates, claiming that Juan and Freddy poisoned the dessert. However, behind closed doors, offers were whispered by many voices, contracts being waived by foreign investors. Fortunes are promised by lenders if the guys would just transfer authority. Every one threat was heightened by rejection. Freddy's sit was more than just disobedience to refuse. It was survival. The earth itself pushed underground back more forcefully. One tunnel gave way, abruptly blocking off a passage just minutes following its clearance by the crew. The noise resembled thunder, imprisoned in cacophony. Additionally, as the dust settled, the air became thin, nearly choking, not able to breathe. However, even as the threat became closer shattered, rock inside showed something. Freddy stood frozen, where he was crystalline structures teeming with apparent free milling. Gold that is so plentiful that appeared to have been burned into the stone itself. Not only was it precious, but it was renowned. What they discovered was in recovery from a mine. It was accurate of secrets, geological. Some people are buried for reasons no one knows, desired to be excavated. Additionally, every blow of Thepik was urging them towards something far bigger and much more deadly more than they ever anticipated. The evidence arrived each time they extracted a new core from Theric. In addition to carrying currency, shards fusion of rare materials, copper, and silver in ways that geologists found difficult to describe. This was neither a body nor a standard. It was an anomaly, a secret system that hasn't been grouping. Freddy studied in the floodlights. Veins, and for a brief moment, heavy pulsed like living arteries. They swore as though the mountain were defying extraction. Next came the first sabotage. One of the pumps that morning was discovered in a devastated state. Clean wires were severed. The casing was intentionally dented. It was in war. It intentionally dented. It was in war. It was a person. The Sapphire cameras only captured slipping shadows dot in between the mountains. Figures that have previous light sun came up. However, the timing was ideal dot as they got closer to the richest area. The vital link preventing the mine from drowning was cut off. Freddy clenched his jaw dot security, but the point was obvious. Their quest was not an isolated one. That the urgency was only increased by sabotage. One improvised a substitute system in keeping track of time. Soldering metal pieces, tunnels were illuminated by sparks resembling lighting. The pump screamed back to life. They showed a hole that nobody anticipated. A room that miners excavated out of had obviously been here before. On its walls, fading notes and charcoal scroll sharded veins that vanished into gloom. The handwriting was identical. Records of men who disappeared without justification for about 50 years earlier. The discovery they made wasn't only mine. It served as a cemetery for expeditions that had been forgotten. The drills made cuts as they pushed downward, into stone with a metal-like ring. Innervated within the wall of the compartment was a timber lattice in superb condition, securing tunnels without a map or cognizant. Freddy's lamp showed pick marks that predate any claimed documentation. This gold long has been reached for by someone before to the present, and their work hatterist. Sealed, buried. That gold realization set in. This wasn't simply unrealized wealth. It was taken, a return to history. The discovery erupt with a bone-tearing noise. Rocks break apart, and the cavity outside wasn't vacant. Sheets of glitter covered a dot of uncovered gold so thickly coated that even the walls shone like mirrors. Stunned, the crew stood. They weren't no more chasing veins. They had strolled into a room where the earth had combined with treasure in its very flesh. The discovery spread more quickly than fire. Telephonicals came in from overseas numbers providing buyouts right away. Helicopters started to circle above, to low, too faint to be coincidental. Gunshots rang out at night in Theffer away, bouncing over the canyon walls. The crew was filled with fear, but Freddy wouldn't shut down. Each bar that added weight to their melty disobedience. At that moment, the second the collapse occurred. A thunderclap engulfed Thetis shooting out of the eastern tunnel with cannon's force. When quiet dropped, sealing half of the chamber separating them from the wealthy section. However, amid the confusion, something unexpected was exposed. A black seam gold-threaded rock, so fine it resembled interlaced hair. Verified test Shira wasn't the only one. It was one of the highest levels of purity ever observed. Tens of millions of dollars if taken out cautiously. The threat increased to obsession. Juan's devices ripped farther, as though pursuing something, biting into a rock living. Sparks flew from drills used for honing as engines roared. The earth shuddered like a beast waking underneath them. Every meter below appeared to invite a catastrophe. Floods erupting fractures, toxic gases leaking upward, cave-ins brought on by their personal momentum. The readings, however, never misled. The body beneath it was enormous, extending beyond what their maps could show capture. Then one evening, the earth itself let out a groan with the shutter that windows far away shook. Nearby university seismologists shot up at the gate and demanded entry. The assertion that Freddy's drilling was causing instability in the area. They made a suggestion indicated a fault line ran through the deposit, connected to more substantial earthquake structures, implying that their search wasn't just dangerous. It could awaken something disastrous. Although Freddy considered the warning in high size. The prize had already been claimed form. Additionally, what was the next cleanup? Poured, a bar was spat out of the boiler. Soil was so heavy that it bent the mold, shining with a weight that made the crew quiet. Respected at a single pour of millions, it marked the instant conjecture ceased. The dying in addition to being revived, mine was now a staggeringly large jackpot. However, the shadows increased along with the gold, observing, circling, and anticipating that time to attack. That quiet stretched, more substantial than the actual gold. The crew remained motionless, staring at bright bar as if it were prohibited. The trance was broken by Freddy. Initially, he ran his fingers over its surface. His flesh burning from the heat, Booth didn't recoil. This demonstrated that something had been sacrificed in the desert. Remarkable. However, for ounce of gold exposed, the threat became more acute. As soon as it was present, the danger flows in it. The dangers were no longer concealed in shadows. An unmarked truck convoy showed up one morning on the ridge. They're like animals, engines idle, waiting for a signal. Men emerged, looking about the site with military accuracy. They had no text or logos, only appresents that warmed the hearts of all employee Ezracine. Freddy gave the crew instructions. below earth, caulking the openings with rubbish and loaders. Overhead, the engine snarled, motionless, observing the siege without any firearms. The mine allowed its last weapon. Drills cutting the rock entered the collapsed dome. Dot cried out, an abrasive echo that shook cracked lamps and helmets. Water exploded. Dot upward in hot, sulphurous jets, filling shafts more quickly than pumps' cold refrain. However, that torrent was blended and were tumbling flecks of transparent gold, similar like sparks in a flood. The crew gathered handfuls out of the water, observing fortunes pass by their fingers. Despite the danger of the tunnels gonna drown them alive. Amid the confusion, once more, Juan's scanner pings. Through the cavernous cavity appeared as the river rose. Dot bigger than any chamber yet on his map. They pushed the drills through. Dot falling stone. Abruptly, the mountain collapsed, revealing a cavern fading against their light. Within, walls glowed with veins of quartz and what under wetness that is rich in minerals. But internally illuminated. It wasn't online ore. It was a gold cathedral, uncountable, unspoiled, and extending beyond the reach of beams. The discovery was of a biblical proportion, but time lost her adversary. The earth trembled, pillars crumbling, and dust being swallowed at the cavern. The team hardly moved. Dot out, pulling samples that were held tightly to their kiss. With the cathedral behind them, it closed with a thunderous roar. What their little possessions were sufficient to verify it. The prize was genuine, yet it lay in an area that was too unstable, too difficult to control. Above ground, the siege was no more. No guys, no trucks, only tire tracks spiraling in the dust out into the distance. However, abandoned was an unfamiliar thing. Just one crate locked, scrolling Freddy's name over its cover. They discovered now threats, documents rather than weapons, deeds, contracts, and survey maps with marking showing the names of businesses that had long ago disintegrated. A few were dated, some centuries ago, others decades earlier, carrying seals that no contemporary entity could ascribe. Whoever had abandoned them was aware of them past in ways that even Freddy could not at all. Then the last blow was delivered. Day slitter, satellites monitored an increase in seismic activity immediately below the mean. An incident that was captured on surveillance stations across the globe. It was described as small and innocuous. However, the natives were more aware. The planet had moved, consuming half of the procedure. Dot in a sinkhole where only dust remained, and quiet. As rescuers looked, no evidence of the cavern was discovered. Tunnels, not a gold cathedral. The desert has shut its jaw. However, rumors expanded more quickly than the collapse. The gold bars, whispers that had already departed the private, placed samples that were sold at auction for millions, of purchasers who exchanged riddles concerning veins that shouldn't be there. Freddy and Juan disappeared from view. Their names only appear in snippets, court documents, and border sightings towns. Reports of secret vaults constructed on the sides of mountains. Additionally, somewhere in Ether is a single falsehood that no one acknowledges is secure. Bar from the last pour. Too heavy of a bar to raise without using both hands. Not imprinted be the mine itself. Not a refinery. Natural designs are carved on its surface that appear more like veins than a map. A map that nobody has